everyone. Welcome to Next Generation Today. I'm Alan West. Newspapers across the country have been reporting spikes in the cost of gas at the pump. Headlines such as Fresno gas prices spiked 44 cents in a month, or gas prices in Virginia jumped 39 cents in a month. So what's driving these increases? Joining me from Washington, D.C. to explain why gas prices are getting too high and what can be done is Daniel Kish. Daniel is the Senior Vice President at the Institute for Energy Research. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Kish, or if I can call you Daniel, this week we saw crude oil prices going down 91 cents a barrel in the New York Mercantile Exchange, for instance. But gas prices aren't predicted to go down anytime soon. As a matter of fact, we've seen about a 45-cent increase in the last 33 days. So what is happening? Why do we have this difference in the mercantile going down, but the price of gasoline at the pump going up?
Right. Well, generally there's a lag time, Colonel, in the difference between the price of oil both going up and down, although it goes up a lot faster than it goes down. But basically what's happening is we're having a crunch at some of the refineries in certain parts of the country because we use different blends in different places. This used to not be the case. You could move gasoline from one part of the country to the other, but now, because of environmental regulations, EPA and local, at the demand of EPA, we have different blends, and so we call them boutique fuels, but you can't move it from one place to the next, which means that if a refinery goes down, it can't easily be replaced. And we've lost significant refinery capacity over a number of years, but especially over the last several years. One in particular, a huge refinery in the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, that used to supply the East Coast. So there's always these fluctuations. It should settle down a little bit, right, if nothing happens, but there's also concern about what's happening in the Middle East and a lot of concern about what the administration is going to do in terms of its continuing fight against fossil or organic, as I like to call them, fuels.
Sure. You know, you bring up a great point, and that dovetails into the next question I want to ask, because when you look at these certain states, like California example, and they have these higher gas prices because of those environmental standards that have been written into law because of the different type of blends that are out there, you know, what type of specific standards are really deterring us from keeping these prices at a manageable level? And you know, can we get to a point where we have a federal standard and maybe not so much a state standard, which, as you said, it causes problems with the interstate commerce?
Right. Well, regardless of whose standards they are, they'll still drive the price of gasoline up, but at least we won't suffer from this inability to move fuel around to take care of problems in the market. And the EPA is moving towards making everybody use California-style gasoline. I think they were waiting until after the election.
To overstate
and they'll probably
the
wait
importance
until they get the new EPA administrator confirmed before they do that. But they're pushing for that. But that's going to also drive up the cost of gasoline because it costs more to make this new style of gasoline.
You know, you bring up a great point in that, you know, these regulations continue to grow, and we saw that being pushed off until after the election. You know, what do we see as far as our crude oil domestic policy? Are we producing enough crude oil domestically? Because you continue to hear that we are at the highest levels of doing that, but when you really look at, you know, state by state or some of the private lands, that's where we do see a lot more exploration. So what's your assessment on domestic crude oil production?
Well, that's the great story, Colonel. The great story is that last year we increased oil production in the United States at a higher rate by more barrels last year than at any time since Abraham Lincoln was a senator, 1859. And that's the great news. Now, here's the rub. The rub is that on the government's lands, on the federal government's lands, and we just got the numbers yesterday from the Department of Interior, the production actually went down. So what's happening is that thank God that we have private land and state lands that isn't all owned by the government, because on the lands where the administration has the policy and pushes forward on things, production's going down. On lands like those in North Dakota and Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas, across the board, production's going up. We've seen it with natural gas. We're seeing it with oil. But the fact is the government is not pulling on the wagon at all when it comes to this. In fact, they've got less than 3% or about 3% of all the total lands that they own leased for energy production, and they just simply refuse to open up any new ones or even allow that Canadian oil in through the Keystone pipeline. That would help as well.
Great point. You know, when you talked about the Bakken fields in North Dakota, it's very interesting that you have the federal government, the administration, and also the EPA trying to shut down what's happening there at Bakken, as well as in Pennsylvania, some other places. You just mentioned the Keystone XL pipeline. For God knows what reason, we still have not gotten an approval on that. But if that pipeline can be approved, what do you assess would be the impact of the price of gasoline here in the United States of America?
Yeah, great question. Right now, that oil is backing up in that area, and we're actually having to pay the additional cost of moving it by train. This has been very good for Warren Buffett, who owns the Burlington Northern Railroad, and also the company that makes tank cars. Moving oil by pipeline is the cheapest, safest, most environmentally sound way, and it actually consumes less energy. It's under the ground, obviously. Moving it by train car just increases the likelihood of a disaster, but that's what they're doing. They're moving oil out of Canada and out of the North Dakota fields by railroad car, and that adds cost to the oil. Ultimately, it would help to have additional supplies. It's as simple as supply and demand when it comes to energy. If you have more of it, like we have with natural gas, because of those private lands in Pennsylvania, Marcellus, that makes the price go down. People see it. We haven't been able to have that much of an impact yet on oil, but it will come, and a lot of people believe that it's already been putting a dampening price, that oil prices would be a lot higher if it weren't for the increased production in the United States.
Well, I have to tell you, Daniel, as we wrap it up, it's amazing to me, back when I was a young man in Georgia, we had the Saudi oil embargo crisis. I remember the odd even days when we had to go to our gas pumps based upon that last number in your license plate. We did get a chance to talk about Ben Bernanke and this whole quantitative easing and devaluing our dollar and the effects that that can have. But I really do appreciate your insight into this energy crisis. We have to work to get this country energy independent. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Daniel.
Thank you, Colonel. We've got the oil and gas to do it. We just need a government that'll let us.
It's all about leadership. Well, I think we're running out of time, or as some would say, we're running on empty. That was Daniel Kish with the Institute for Energy Research. You can find out more about what his organization is doing by visiting their website at instituteforenergyresearch.org. Comment below to tell us what you think about the rising cost of gasoline and also federal regulations. Should President Obama allow the pipeline to be constructed? And how are higher gas prices affecting you and your family? For Next Generation TV, thanks for watching.